You can find it at the buttons on your screen in the Zoom. And I will try and address some of those questions if they come up in real time, but I will come back to them at the end, of course, as well. All right. So my name is Tom King, and I'm the founder and the Borencana Foundation. It's a nonprofit formed to better enable the transformation of the energy infrastructure of Puerto Rico. It's easy and alluring sometimes to oversimplify a career of over 30 years in the private sector. And I've been working with PR in terms of energy security and renewables for over, well, the last 9 years at least. Starting a nonprofit as opposed to sitting on the board has been an enlightening experience for me. My background, for reference, includes decades of investment banking, private equity, project finance and advisory, and business development. I've got transaction values that I stopped counting, honestly, at 25 billion years ago. And I have experience working on virtually, well, not virtually, but every continent except Antarctica. And I'm still hoping one day to do something there. And in every case, it was almost always connected one way or another with energy. So I have an emotional, intellectual connection with the island and a depth of skills and experiences and relationships that serve to address notable gaps in Puerto Rico's available skill and resource base that I strongly believe can make a positive and lasting difference. I'll just move on. I'll turn the video off so it's not a distraction. All right. So first, quickly, the Fundación Borencana is a recently formed nonprofit focused on accelerating the energy infrastructure transformation of Puerto Rico for the benefit of its people and the people of the world. Puerto Rico will build a first of its kind modern system of energy infrastructure and will be a model for the transformation of core infrastructure worldwide. Transformation is already underway, but it's not without its challenges. It can be accomplished well or poorly. At the foundation, we prefer to see it done well. Among the initiatives that we have commenced are gaining pace in Puerto Rico, which is engaged in working toward establishing a property assessed clean energy finance market to drive commercial property adoption and ownership of broad energy and other infrastructure resiliency improvements. We're also looking to expand the cooperative formation in Puerto Rico as a means to encourage broader participation in the transition and transformation of energy infrastructure, accomplishing this to help communities broadly defined through the process of formation and management of electric cooperatives. The foundation is thrilled to be working with Unidos Puerto on the Cooperativa Hidroeléctrica de la Montaña. This is a truly groundbreaking effort, which we strongly believe will improve the lives of Puerto Ricans, serve as a benchmark and a template for other similar efforts, and contribute meaningfully to the transformation of energy infrastructure island-wide. The foundation is also focused on energy regulation. Puerto Rico's new regulatory regime will be the first of its kind in the world to manage the transformation to distributed prosumer model. This is one of the linchpin areas that can facilitate or hinder the successful recovery and transformation. Puerto Rico has the privilege and the responsibility to rewrite the utility regulatory handbook for the 21st century. There's some examples and roadmaps for that part, but there are zero precedents. And Puerto Rico is going to have to move in a direction that hasn't been done before. We're also focused on federal support and the alignment of the goals and needs of the federal government in disaster recovery and establishments in Puerto Rico to focus on those things that the federal government can do to crowd in private funding and act as a transitional financial support to the activities in Puerto Rico. The last program you're all, I think, familiar with is the Coalición de los Dispuestos, which is a sort of informal organization that we've launched in order to accelerate cooperation and share information toward implementing better solutions for Puerto Rico's energy infrastructure and economy. So we're actually proud and honored to announce that we have completed a fiscal sponsorship agreement with the American Renewable Energy Institute that allows us to accept tax-deductible contributions. This is brand new. We haven't made the announcements yet, but we're obviously looking forward to doing that in the next week and moving forward to gain support both individually and financially from our supporters in order to help establish firmly our activities in Puerto Rico. All right, with everything comes a disclaimer. I'm optimistic about the future of Puerto Rico's energy transformation and what it means for the stability and economic prosperity of the island. But I'm not blind to the challenges that impact that potential. What I'm about to discuss are primarily my opinions. I have no inside knowledge. I'm not disclosing any particular information that is non-public. The projections or assumptions or trends that will be discussed here are based primarily on my direct involvement in Puerto Rico and 30 plus years of relevant experience around the world. This is very much an overview and does not deal in detail with any particular challenge or opportunity. There are a great many equally accomplished and knowledgeable people looking in today, and I hope that that you will share, as long as your questions and discussions at the end. So one more time, just asking people to keep their microphones on mute. And please use the chat feature if you can find it to list your questions. I'll try to address some of them in real time, but we'll definitely come back to them at the end. All right, a quick survey looking at current events. We have the energy policy law that was drafted up last year and has been amended by the Committee of the House that is still in conference between the two parties. The governor has said that he will sign what comes out. This is actually one of the most advanced and ambitious energy policies put forward anywhere in the world. It has widespread bipartisan support in the House and the Senate of Puerto Rico. There's a little bit of sort of jockeying between the House and the Senate, with the House adding some populist measures to the overall law. But in general, expect it to be settled in conference and eventually come out and become the law of the land. What it calls for is 100% of renewables by 2050. One might question the logic of putting a renewables target into an energy policy for a state that is in the process of rebuilding and recovering. But I think if you have or you do spend a bit of time in Puerto Rico, the 100% number is probably a bit more symbolic. And while I believe they're going to ultimately leave much of the actual decision of what the speed and what gets done to the regulator that gets set up, it basically tells a signal to the people of Puerto Rico that we're not going back to business as usual. This also includes a privatization and basically sales of generation and transmission and distribution under a concession agreement. It also importantly moves beyond what existed before in terms of regulation to set up a well-funded regulator with supposedly a good deal of transparency. We'll see how that plays out. There are some reasons to question the ultimate level of independence that the regulator will have, but this is a substantial step in the right direction. The integrated resource plan that has been long promised and is well overdue, prepared by Siemens on behalf of PREPA, has been submitted to the regulator. It's entered into what we call a quiet period of determination, at which point, if the regulator believes that it's complete, there will be a comment period and opportunities to potentially intervene on the proposed plan and the ultimate regulation. The plan is a little bit betwixt and between because of, well, too many shifting targets and priorities, but it is nevertheless revolutionary in the way that it looks at the market going forward and the way that it will be, you know, transformed and rebuilt. There are massive increases in solar and storage and distributed energy. Of course, the storage target still only represents about 25% of peak demand, but more importantly, it moves toward resiliency through the establishment of what some people are calling mini grids across 8 regions that will eventually be able to operate independently of one another in an emergency situation, rather than exist in the same way that the grid does today with incredible amount of single point failure risk. We've seen exactly what that gets us through Maria. So also not here to debate the natural gas versus the ultra purists. Natural gas will be part of the future, but it does need to be managed transparently and intelligently. The Financial Oversight and Management Board has played an important role in moving things along and making sure that things happen. It's worth noting that the Financial Oversight and Management Board is in some turmoil. There have been, one notable resignation. Noel Zamat is resigning early, about 3 months early from the end of his term. But the First Circuit Court in Boston actually ruled that the appointments of the administrators, or the board, if you like, to the FOMB was unconstitutional. They believe that it needs to be, they need to be nominated by the president and confirmed. They're looking at what to do about this at this point. It's possible many of the existing members would not necessarily be re-nominated and appointed. And the truth is that a number of them are coming toward the end of their terms as it is. So not sure exactly where this is going to come out, but you can expect this to add another layer of uncertainty in the near term. So CDBG, DR, basically disaster recovery monies that have been voted in a couple of different tranches. Worthwhile knowing this actually represents a lot of stimulus to rebuild, and there's a good amount of support for new distributed installation within the planned allocations of that particular money. The first batch has been approved. The second allocations are sort of still in formation and have not yet been provided or released to the HUD for Puerto Rico, who's administering them. A couple of things to potentially note, positives for the purpose of opportunity and transformation. The Department of Economic Development in Puerto Rico, who will have oversight of the distributions for the developments around energy and others, have targeted about a little over 400 million between the two CBDG grants for distributed solar and storage. Probably a lot of that's going to end up supporting new grid scale solar that's planned, but some of it will certainly be available for smaller scale. Beyond that, and this is actually something I have to give them a lot of credit for, is they put together an initial fund of 35 million that they're going to extend toward 100 million for construction lending to support the the construction period. It's important to note in Puerto Rico there is actually no concept of a workman's lien, so constructors and financiers. Mortgage holders are often at odds during the construction period. What it means is you either have to pay up an extraordinarily large upfront fee, effectively pay or secure the amounts for the constructor as you go, or the constructor, contractor, EPC has to take on the additional risk and the capital needed in order to get to the end of the day. It makes all the capital and construction harder and more expensive. So they've allocated some money to act as a fund for construction. So important step. It's reassuring to know that people are actually looking at the detail. All right. So path to transformation, not path. The hurricane basically destroyed lives and livelihoods and devastated the state, and rebuilding is going to take many years. But the devastation wrought by these storms, the failure of PREPA, and the bankruptcy of the Commonwealth have paradoxically created fertile conditions for transformation and a globally unparalleled opportunity to build back a first of its kind modern system of infrastructure. The incumbent obstruction nearly everywhere else, and I'm talking here about utilities that work, states that work, regulatory structures that work, this is actually a hindrance or an obstruction to transformation in those markets. Well, in Puerto Rico, they don't exist. There's no real sense of obstruction, which is not to say that the folks in PREPA and elsewhere can't get in the way, but it does mean that long-term, to quote an old program, resistance is futile. More important, there's a real sense through the state and through the government and a prevailing belief in change, even radical change. So Puerto Rico is actually now and will be the sandbox where clean and sustainable energy technologies, business practices, financial innovation, dynamic regulatory structure, and especially political will are all tested and refined to create the modern, resilient, distributed grid and energy infrastructure of the future. So a couple of key things, and there are basically, the way I break it down, sort of three key paths and opportunities toward transformation. Large-scale, grid-connected renewables, and potentially other types of generation. There's the sort of middle-scale CNI and microgrids that are being proposed and actually working toward in many parts of the island. And there's also mass volume, small scale, behind the meter. Think about it as residential and small businesses, primarily solar and storage. And then there's basically everything that goes along with it. It's worth stopping and noting that the policies and the privatization that is proposed is broadly a prerequisite for capital and innovation to take place and form. So we're not quite there yet. We need to see the policy passed and signed by the governor. We need to see a regulator that is transparent and independent, be able to take on sort of the dynamic regulation and provide that sort of anchor and certainty that encourages investment. We need that to translate into an understanding of things for a modern market, a prosumer market, including key understanding of wheeling and net metering, wholesale and retail rates for power, the separation of operations, preferably from the sale of power, exit fees. We can go kind of on and on into that. and that's all to do. But there is definitely a movement, a feeling, and an understanding broadly that this is the direction that it's going to go. Probably stopping and starting along the way, but it's going to move faster in that direction here than I think anywhere else in the sort of in the first world. All right, so moving on. Just wanted to touch on the challenges. So not ignoring the challenges that we're looking at and facing here in the market. Puerto Rico's open. It's up. It's operating, obviously, but it definitely needs to move and renew its infrastructure to stabilize the economy and spur economic growth. This sometimes puts elements of the transformation at odds with each other, but it's working through. Real progress is accelerating in distributed generation and storage at the local level. Some of the microgrids, some of the community centers, and others that have supported. But these transformative achievements obviously can't move the needle fast enough in the short term. Puerto Rico is going to require billions. It's going to require grid-connected solar, and it's going to need to get it moving. But it's worthwhile noting that the uncertainty, lack of visibility, lack of understanding of scale and liquidity for investments are going to hold people back. There isn't yet a clear path to understanding who the counterparties will be. The privatization obviously is positive, but adds uncertainty. And of course, the return of the state and its entities or former entities to the capital markets is certainly beyond the visible horizon. Potential investors and lenders need to be aware that it could be some time for large and scale investments to present themselves. Building to scale and building into an understanding is important, and patience, I think, if you're looking at the Puerto Rican market. The difficulty moves even further as a somewhat of an ignored top-down controlled market. Some of the institutional and workforce capacities don't really exist in Puerto Rico in the same way, and that runs right across the spectrum. So it's going to be important to build that capacity in the workforce, in the institutions, in the pathways that allow progress to be made, allow capital to be dispensed, to create something that is replicable, scalable, and sustainable. These are challenges that we look at, and we look at in the market. These are challenges that at the foundation we're looking to address in terms of some of the programs that we've mentioned to you before. But what this actually leads to is that it's going to be difficult to absorb the stimulus that's being provided in the CBDG. I think there's actually examples in some of the earlier monies provided by FEMA for reconstruction of houses where they're kind of creating systems and pathways for this to be transacted as they go, and it ends up needing organization of organization. You create a whole layer of middlemen within that system, and you end up that at the end of the day, 20-25% of what you put out actually ends up doing the work that you expect it to do. Something like that could happen within the energy sector and some of the energy transformation for the dollars that we're talking about here. Just worthwhile being aware of. It's not the easiest thing to establish those sort of things. It will take some time to create the pathways that are required. And we really don't want to see a situation where we're backing up a truck with billions of dollars into Puerto Rico. At the end of the day, only 20% of it is as effective as we hope it to be. All right, so just wanted to point out this headline here is actually from today's paper. Just so people are interested, I just pulled it up this morning. Basically, again, part of the difficulty in terms of transparency and how the monies will be spent and put forward. Just highlighting. All right. Got it. Okay, so the first kind of most obvious, the thing that people are looking at the most from an investment standpoint, this is what the larger private equity groups and institutional lenders and other people are looking at. It's basically grid scale and grid connected. This is absolutely going to go forward. Everything is not going to be rooftop and behind the meter. It's a grid connected world, and it's not going away overnight, but this is where things will begin to move. So large amounts of distributed, think your mini grids and grid connected utility scale is going to be needed. So how this gets rolled out in terms of the location is probably more important than kind of the amounts or who can move fastest. We need to make sure that as we spread out the generation and add new utility scale renewables and storage to the grid, that we're not putting it back in the same places that have all of the conventional power in the southeast when we're looking to make sure that the island is more resilient. It will be difficult to get these large scale projects done. And you note I've also added in here new gas, build on operate. And then I believe that some of the oil-fired stations, which will certainly be retired, may actually have a longer lease of life in private hands if they are converted to natural gas. This shouldn't upset people who are looking at long-term conversions and installations of renewables. There's an end date to the usefulness of some of that, but it's critically important to make sure that a good deal of that potential baseload and peaking capacity is still available to the island for a number of years to come. What do I mean by it's going to be a little bit difficult to get these things done? Well, it really comes back to the lack of certainty. So while there's a huge amount of deals to do in terms of grid connected renewables, the IRP alone talks about 2,000 megawatts and 1,000 megawatts of storage over a fairly short period of time. If you can't address either structurally or otherwise the uncertainty in the off-taker or the rules around which those contracts will be regulated and administered, it's going to be difficult to get capital on board. So again, there are going to be opportunities here. There's going to be potentially a handful of projects that move forward. I'll note that Greenbrier has been invited by PREPA to renegotiate its solar project, grid-connected solar project with storage. And there is a potential to use some of the CDBG money to create a credit backstop, a debt service reserve, et cetera, payment surety. But the details around that are scarce, and if they can't find a way to leverage that ability through a private sector structure for credit enhancement, it's going to be difficult to imagine that more than a handful of projects can move forward at any time in the next few years. Okay, the next path, if you like, is the middle path, if you like. Basically, behind the meter, commercial and industrial, storage, gas, CHP. This is actually a bit broader than solar and battery storage, but solar and battery storage is certainly a big part of this. This is the island beginning to move in different directions, moving away from the command and control situation of the single government utility into the little bit of the Wild West of everybody's entitled to do it on their own. This is happening. It is moving. It is not happening necessarily as quickly as some people would like, but it is going on, and is going to become an important part of the overall integrated generation within the island. These are mostly going to be grid connected systems. It is more about resiliency and sustainability of business associated with the operations on the island. Strangely enough, there is I guess a differentiation here between what the one group of the government who's looking to privatize and maximize the value out of the assets of PREPA and provide for the most favorable sort of operating concession within the combination of the sale of power and the operating of the system on the one hand, and the other end of the government, which is the Department of Development and Economic and Commerce and Economic Development, that is a large landlord for commercial facilities and is looking for these to be attractive facilities with resiliency and their own sources of power. And so they are moving probably as fast or faster than some of the private groups independently to ensure that their facilities have microgrids and can generate and operate independently of the rest of the grid in need. There are also paths toward single installation of microgrids at many of the private sector groups out there, pharmaceuticals and manufacturers that actually own their own facilities. Quite a number actually are just long-term leases from PRIDCO, which is the Puerto Rican Industrial Development Company under the Department of Commerce and Economic Development. There's also an interest between municipal and microgrid community center installations and operations that are going on. There's obviously a credit question around some of these and counterparty risk, but these are also in process and present an opportunity. So I'll just mention one other that will become a model probably in this direction is that there's Roosevelt Roads, which is, for those who aren't kind of up on it, a former military installation that was effectively handed back and given to the government of Puerto Rico. And there have been stops and starts to redevelop the area, which is on the East Coast, I think it's just south of Fajardo, that area, but over on the East Coast. The development is actually setting itself up and is actually setting up its own utility effectively. It's called a microgrid or a regional grid, but it's really setting up a utility that will serve the needs of the businesses and others that come to the area, and potentially could also provide generation, even potentially direct services to some of the nearby towns. It's an interesting model. It's one to pay attention to. Not necessarily so much about the way that the rest of the grids on the island operate, but there is an interest among several of the municipalities to actually take control of their own grids and form their own municipal utilities. And if this is successful, it could spur a bit more of that sort of thinking. But we have yet to see the rules actually set up to effectively support that type of movement toward local control of and operation of the local grids. All right, the other is interesting, sort of mass volume, small scale. So by this, talking about small businesses and residential behind the meter, primarily solar and storage, though not necessarily only that. with the advent of the rules and the changes, this is actually mostly wide open legally. There are very few impediments to actually undertaking these types of installations all over the island. That's nice. The difficulty, of course, is that doing something like this at scale, particularly against the background of what is relative poverty, disadvantaged areas, etc., needs organization, credit structuring, and capital formation to make it happen. But there's actually a pretty interesting opportunity, and it could actually get moving relatively quickly and grow to scale from a very small base. And this is largely, I believe, going to happen through cooperatives. They provide a legal structure and an organization to begin to aggregate buyers at scale, and provides a single point counterparty that you can look at the structure and get comfortable with its ability to pay. Negating some of the concerns that you would have involving kind of the municipal or certainly anything at the state level in the near future. Scale in some ways is actually the biggest problem here. Even if you get 100, 200 people together to start a cooperative, the first few at scale volume-based installations are probably going to be in total less than a megawatt, and that's it's difficult to get capital excited to do that. But the idea is to show a pathway really to this being replicable and then scalable. So there's an interesting opportunity there. I'll just say as well that when we talk about cooperatives, you typically think about a rural cooperative or rural utility. You're talking about one that is operating the wires. When I think about this, I think about it in terms of the virtual utility. And I'll mention that a little bit more because I cover it actually on the next slide. But when we look at the communities themselves, and we look at the relationship between businesses and their communities, there's a difficult question that has to be answered, and the basic question is, if I'm a private operator, if I'm a pharmaceutical company, there's a lot I can do. In fact, I've probably already done it. It's mostly probably diesel backup to actually make sure that my factory, my assembly lines, etc., can continue to operate for a reasonably prolonged period of time in the event of an island-wide power outage, or even a regional power outage for my area. But that doesn't help their community. What they found is that in the storm, a lot of these installations did have diesel backup. They did have power. They did have the ability to run their operations, but because no one around them had the ability to provide, power for cell charging, or for cooking, or for clean water, or water pumping, or other things, they became the community centers. So the full answer to their questions about sustainable and sustainability of their businesses within Puerto Rico were not answered by the fact that they could run themselves all day long. They need to see resiliency built into the communities, and they need to see resiliency built into their suppliers as well, which tend to be smaller and part of the communities. A number of the C&I and other things that get rolled out there could help some of these, but really there needs to be an answer to community resiliency, and the communities described or associated around these pharmaceutical and manufacturing company installations beyond that. And I think cooperatives are one way to organize that. You could organize cooperatives from employees and others and begin to build a sustainable level of resiliency for your suppliers and beyond into your local communities, to make sure that the continuity that you're looking for actually exists. Sorry, I got a little bit off, but Smaller scale stuff, community solar, once the rules are established, could be very interesting. A number of people live in communities, apartments, and others with limited opportunity to actually benefit from direct, behind the meter solutions. So the ability of putting community solar within communities, particularly less advantaged communities within Puerto Rico, is quite a big one, bigger in some ways than you might see community solar in other parts of the U.S. Community lighting is actually an interesting one that came up, and there are others. Okay, so mass volume, small scale. Sorry, much more. The opportunities here, I talked about this, the emergence of the virtual utility. It's an opportunity, I think, that the new business models and the moving forward, if you like, on the prosumer model faster than elsewhere presents. And I think some of the cooperatives and some of the community centers and other things that are being built and developed will actually provide for the emergence of what I call the virtual utility. Which basically is could be large scale, could eventually be hundreds of megawatts and similar amounts of storage. But instead of being grid connected, you're talking about something that is distributed all over the grid, small amounts behind the meters and operated in relation to the grid as effectively a key grid player, which means an ability not just to provide demand response, but also active response through storage around the island to balance the system, and therefore becoming a key part of the stability and operation of the grid and the mini grids going forward. It's interesting. I believe firmly you're going to see that in Puerto Rico. If I can have a hand in it, I will. Municipal vertical utilities, we're actually talked a little bit about that. There's definitely interest. There's groups in Villalba who are looking at potentially doing exactly that, where they're taking control of their operations and the grid, looking to. Villalba has actually been granted the opportunity to take over a disused, unused, let's say, and hydroelectric plant of about 8 megawatts that's within its territory, and refurbish it and bring it back into operation as a municipal asset. Be following that very closely. Villalba has been one of the most aggressive at setting up and separating itself and providing resiliency through taking direct municipal control of energy operations. Needless to say, I think all of the support and finance businesses that go with the above, equipment supply, technology, et cetera, with all the rebuilding, with the money, with the fact that Puerto Rico is on the doorstep of Latin America, the highly educated engineering workforce that can be tapped within Puerto Rico. The fact that it's U.S. dollar based makes investment easy. I'll add that there's strong local support and incentives within the tax codes and structures within Puerto Rico, not to mention the U.S. tax codes, to set up manufacturing assembly as well as export businesses in Puerto Rico. These all provide opportunities for broader impact at that level. But it's also interesting, I believe, and will be interesting for energy technology companies to look toward the Puerto Rican market as an opportunity to both test their products and business practices, but also as a base to grow from for export and for growing their companies. It's a thesis of mine and of the Fundación and one or two interesting groups on the island we hope to work with in the future to bring some of this about. So lastly, just wanted to touch base on show me the money. Uh, and you've got your mics on, so hopefully you're snickering. I wanted to touch again. Where's the money coming from? So most of the money immediately that's coming to the island is coming in the form of CDBG grants associated with rebuilding, and expect that that a lot of this is actually going to be deployed. We mentioned before the possible difficulties in actually finding pathways for this money to flow. But I have faith that we have some time and opportunities to be able to fix that on the ground and make it effective. I'll touch on a couple of things I didn't touch on before in terms of the CBDG, and this is really been a sampling, but the some of the things in the second wave of the CBDG that it's worthwhile thinking about if you're thinking about structuring your projects or investments. There's a critical infrastructure resilience program. This is actually an allocation of up to $400 million, and it could be up to $50 million in any given project. This is actually targeted at municipalities, and municipalities are eligible to receive these funds, and they can be used toward establishing key energy infrastructure projects. It's worthwhile keeping that one in mind. There is a city revitalization program, and it can be municipalities and nonprofits or NGOs, and basically it's up to $100 million per project, and the total allocation is up to $1.2 billion. These are not small amounts of money, and if they're judiciously applied, can really begin to turn the dial, move the needle. There's an economic development and investment portfolio for growth. And my God, if anything sounded like a slush fund, that title does it. But it basically allows municipalities and community-based development organizations and private utilities, privately owned utilities, to allow the rehabilitation of commercial infrastructure. So it could mean promoting energy efficiency and includes public and private financing of the rehabilitation. This was actually, I think this is linked, it sounds very similar to a program that exists within the USDA for rural utilities. So maybe that's what the model was. But there's up to $800 million that was actually assigned to the program. And the other one I'll touch on is there's something called strategic projects and commercial development, and it actually comes out of the same section of the CBDG, and the program total there is $150 million, and it's basically meant to establish improvements in commercial infrastructure and commercial real estate properties. I don't know whether this is, it actually doesn't make clear whether it could be used on Puerto properties. Again, these are some of the more prominent ones. But this was actually really meant to be aimed at shoring up the infrastructure associated with private manufacturing, and less so the first wave. The second allocation is looking, I believe, more at office properties and other things, making them more efficient and more self-reliant as far as energy is concerned. Opportunity zones. This is talked about. I think there have been 3 conferences already on opportunity zones in Puerto Rico, and there is another one which is, I believe, on the 5th of March, which I'm hoping to attend. The others I've skipped. Opportunity zones for Puerto Rico, and I'll just point you to the picture on the slide, which a little bit tongue-in-cheek, is a picture across from San Juan Island to Condado, which is basically one of the few places on the island of Puerto Rico that you cannot use opportunity zone funding, because it's one of the few places that doesn't qualify. About 98% by some estimates, by others maybe 94% of the island itself is eligible for opportunity zone funding. Won't get into detail on what the the opportunity zone function is, but essentially it's an incentive to allow the reinvestment of capital gains from other enterprises into an opportunity zone, and the ability to defer the payment of taxes associated with those capital gains for a period of up to 10 years, which basically, projected would allow you to sort of cut your overall tax bill by about 20% over the course of that period of time. But it also allows you to receive your capital gains on the new investment within the opportunity zones as tax-free after 10 years' time. So you need to leave your money in for this to happen. I have been skeptical about the ability to use the opportunity zone structures for energy investments or energy transformation investments. This is primarily capital that will go from real estate into real estate, and that's where the most comfort is going to be. There is a lot of capital accumulation that is seeming to go on, and I'm assured that a reasonable portion of that is actually going to be available for energy projects or energy company investment. I will, I suppose I could say I'll believe it when I see it, but I do actually believe it. And if you are thinking in terms of the real estate investments that are made, they are not going to be made in buildings that and structures and other things that are going to be less valuable in 10 years' time. And if you are not investing in resilient buildings and energy efficient buildings and other types of investments, then you are not going to reap the benefits that you would expect, even if you're just moving from real estate into real estate. So this actually does have a positive role to play within energy transformation. I'll just add that straight energy projects generally don't fit the model well, but companies that grow and serve the new energy market, whether it is a utility or an operating company or a service company or other types of things, could make valuable investments for opportunity zone funding, because of the potential for them to have a higher value at the end of 10 years and therefore create capital gains, making the investment effectively worthwhile. Energy projects and other standalone investments are not accreting assets generally, they're depreciating assets. So the amount that you recover at the end, if you like, doesn't present a capital gain. They're mostly cash flow businesses. And while there are ways to structure these, it's not evident that the capital that coming in are going to appreciate that. So it requires a certain amount of patience, a certain amount of education. But I do believe that monies are going to be available through the opportunity zone schemes for a number of investments within Puerto Rico. I mentioned before PACE and impact investment capital markets. Obviously, none of this stuff is reality today. Impact capital has already played a role in creating examples of solar and storage and other types of resilient installations within Puerto Rico. And while those examples are not particularly replicable or scalable,
they do point to what can be done physically, and the operations of these do reassure potential investors and buyers that what we're talking about in terms of the new energy infrastructure is in fact viable. I think with that, I'm going to get to the end here. And thank everyone for joining. I appreciate your patience. It looks like we do have one or two questions, but I also see we've reached the end of the hour. So what I will do is I'll take these questions and I will actually circulate the responses to them so that everybody who joined can have the benefit. I just want to end with thanking everyone and reminding everyone that an investment in Puerto Rico's energy future is an investment in the future of our planet, and encouraging everyone to join us, and now that we have a fiscal sponsor, to make a donation today. Thank you very much.